Here we go. Good afternoon. Welcome to Robots and Red Tape. I'm your host, Nick Shutt, here today with my good friend, Aaron Pujanandez. Love to, Aaron, if you don't mind, man, would you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got here, and what you're doing now?
Absolutely, Nick. Started my career. First off, I'm a Navy veteran.
Thank you
Spent
for your
some time in
service.
there right out of high school. Started off my career as a federal employee with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, doing some advanced analytics and data strategy. Got into the AI machine learning world by way of being an economist at first. Some people call me a recovering economist. Started my career doing that, and I realized that the forecasting methods that we were using just weren't quite giving us the answers that we wanted to do and wanted to do some more creative things. So that led me into the realm of machine learning with kind of an emphasis on predictive analytics and natural language processing. Left FERC a few years ago and started a data science innovation lab with Accenture Federal Services. Worked there for a number of years across the government. During my time at Accenture, we kind of wore a couple different hats, but the biggest and the most important was coming up with new and innovative ways to solve customer challenges with data. So a lot of what we did was the high impact delivery or the particular projects that maybe needed a little bit of recovery. So we had clients, they had a whole different a bunch of methods that were going on, and we're trying to unlock that value utilizing any type of advanced analytics and or machine learning process.
Fantastic. Can you give me an example of like some of the cooler projects you got to work on and the results you were able to deliver as a result?
Sure. So, I mean, it depends on what you define as cool. I
I mean,
find
I'm talking about what you think is cool, man.
I define answering questions as cool. So
Mm,
I'm the type of data scientist. I don't necessarily need to use the most advanced analytical platform or the best in breed process. I like cool challenges that we're able to figure out a solution to it. At the end of the day, analytics for me is a very much a problem solving activity. So a couple good ways was we were able to work with the U.S. Marshal Service during my time there to come up with a prototype, which we called Facebook for Felons, which was really premised on how are we giving the marshals the information they need to be able to find information on fugitives and where they might be hiding so they can go hit the streets. One of the things that we were optimizing for there was really just the time the amount a marshal had to spend in front of their computers. Marshal's job isn't to sit in front of their computers, is to get the information and move on. At that particular part of the delivery when we were brought in, there was a variety of issues with how the platform was being built, what it was bringing to the table, and how the marshals were getting the ad hoc reporting requirements they needed.
okay.
Reason that we were able to accelerate in this was again not because of any big blinding algorithms, although we did do some interesting stuff with graph
Mhm.
and human-centered design, but really being able to sit down with the marshals and get an understanding of what decisions they were making, what information classified as enough, and how we were actually able to metricize something as not quantifiable and very, very feeling based as do I have enough information? So that was one good thing that we got to do. Another great thing we got to do is when the SEC was first building in their Databricks platform and starting to do a lot of outreach with a variety of business offices to figure out how to be able to start doing it. My lab led a lot of the initial strategizing behind that, figuring out how they were going to engage with business units, how they were going to start communicating the different value streams, and how they were going to start that hypothesis-driven mentality to start building in the value. I could tell you plenty of other stories if you're interested, but those are two of my favorites. Actually, I'll go with the third one. The third one would probably be over at Postal Service, a program called ESIP, which we were doing in conjunction with um, NVIDIA at the time. And that was to build up an ML ops platform that was able to deploy computer vision models to all of the variety of different technology that was within the US Postal Service at the time. Really, the point of this was to be able to quickly deploy the models to be able to detect a variety of things that were going on with packages. It started out just as simple as being able to read a barcode, which anybody familiar with computer vision knows is a very hard problem. You have to be able to do the bounding boxes. Sometimes you got to be able to do a lot of that handwriting recognition. Not easy to solve, but then getting into more advanced use cases such as damage packages, potential signs of fraud, smuggling, things of that nature.
Very cool. Yeah, I could see how that would have a lot of really interesting real world applications and be able to ideally stop things from being sent from point A to point B that shouldn't be going around, right? Whether drugs, weapons, what have you. Really cool stuff. And so you were at Accenture for a while, and what are you doing now?
Well, so after Accenture, I spent a couple years doing the product company thing. So focused on one that was doing a lot of graph analytics and one that was doing a lot of geospatial analytics. Recently, as of last year, started up my own thing with a bunch of my nerdy friends. What we do is we do something called decision-centered design. Decision-centered design got its start within the medical device field, although it's been used throughout a variety of different fields. Really, what it is it's a subset of human-centered design, and it's a methodology that you utilize to be able to get to those core decisions that people are making and the information that they base those decisions on. So if you're in a high stress environment, we can show you a couple different papers that are talking about what are the key decision points and the key inflection points that are going to make a measurable impact on the activity that is coming, the specific outcomes. So if you're looking at medical device, it's literally saving a human being's life. What are those specific decision points, and what information needs to be presented in what way to maximize an individual's ability to take action on it? What I mean by that is all of our brains operate in weird, different, and non-obvious ways. A great example of this is they did a behavioral econ study a long time ago on children's lunches in schools. And one of the effects of that study is they found that if you put the healthy food at eye level and the unhealthy food below eye level, children make healthier choices. If you
Mhm.
swap it around, they will make unhealthier choices. That should be very non-obvious, but it is a specific hack that you can get into the brain. Same
Mhm.
thing goes on in any other decision-making process. So what we've done at Delta Lima is we've taken a lot of that existing goodness from DCD, and we've applied a little bit of our own secret sauce, just because we've worked across so many different things, and we've seen a lot of the common ways, especially public sector organizations, tend to get in their own way. To take that micro level ideation of how are we building a tool for somebody to use to that
Mhm.
more macro level of how are we getting an organization aligned on what analytical methods are going to start driving the outcomes that are important to them, with an emphasis on not doing those kind of high level, hand wavy data strategies that are ever present in the industry, with more
Mhm.
of an actionable based approach to we're going to do this. And by starting this, we're going to do A, B, and C.
Very cool. Very cool. So you're helping public organizations really not only understand how to be more efficient and understand how to do better, but also understand how to present information to decision makers to assist them in making decisions in a better way, a more palatable way, a more easy way for them.
If you think about it, it's not just palatable, it is actionable and driving the outcome you want.
Mhm.
So, and when I say decision makers, I'm not just talking about the higher ups or the executives. What I really am talking about is I'm talking about those on the ground folks, those GS9s, 213s who are doing the day-to-day works. Uh,
Mhm.
Not to say that the people below or above aren't doing it, but the ones that are really doing the everyday process. They
Mhm.
come into their jobs, every single person comes into their job, and they make decision X in order to drive outcome Y.
Right.
In order to do that, they use information, and
Mhm.
that information and that communication of that information to the person can be optimized through analytical hypotheses. I think that I'm going to give a contracting officer better access and insights to the bidders on a potential RFP by doing X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to test that out.
Mhm.
I think I'm going to give the marshals more information to go out and find fugitives by doing X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
I think that I'm going to help USDA detect fraud patterns in disaster relief loans
Mhm.
by doing X, Y, and Z. Again, you have to put in that hypothesis-driven approach into anything doing with analytics. One
Mhm.
of the big faults that a lot of people make is they're treating AI ML as any other software component. They take it,
Mhm.
they throw it out there. What you have to be able to do is you have to be able to know that you can have the greatest idea in the world, but until you actually start pumping that data into those algorithms, you have no idea what the outcomes are going to be. Make
100%.
sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and then Obviously, we are the one of the major themes over the last like year and a half, 2 years. It's really kind of moved into the public, public eye more than anything is the side of generative AI, right? And a lot of people are out here talking about how it's the best thing since sliced bread, and it's going to change everything, and it's like and a lot of the times, I'm just curious in your opinion, how do you think that attitude and that popularity is limiting the public sector's use of their data?
So I think what it is, I think it becomes a very big distraction. So I like to use the analogy that generative AI is a nail gun. Before that, we had the hammer that was natural language processing, and we could do most things that generative AI did. You just generally needed a data scientist in order to be able to do it, and
Mhm,
it wasn't very user intended, user accessible. Uh, Generative AI came along, and now anybody can use it in anything. And there's a number of different use cases that you don't need a data scientist to do. And it does a lot of things a little bit better. So it's very, very high powered. But what has happened is people have gotten so obsessed with this nail gun, they're running around looking for nails. You get a
mhm,
lot of people saying, "Hey, generative AI, what are all the potential use cases that we can take this new tool and apply it to?" My answer to that is if you have to ask what use cases that you're applying generative AI to, you're asking the wrong questions.
mhm,
Rather than starting with a nail gun and running around seeing what you're going to be able to use the nail gun in, you should have a blueprint of the overall decisional architecture that is going on with your organization. What I mean by that is you should be able to understand what are the key decision points that
mhm,
people in your organization are making to drive the outcomes that they need. And
mhm,
then when a new tool comes along, which there are always going to be new tools, there's always going to be these new exciting things
mhm,
that we're going to come along and that we're going to want to take advantage of, it should
mhm.
be a little bit more readily apparent of, hey, instead of using this hammer to go through the effort and hammer that nail in, now I got this automated tool that's going to hammer that in for me. It's going to do it a lot more faster. It's going to do a lot more efficient. And I'm going to
Right.
build that house a lot quicker than I otherwise could.
Mhm,
It becomes a distraction if instead of taking that approach, you're running around and looking for things that you're going to be able to apply the nail gun. And at the risk
mhm,
of stretching the analogy too far, doing it in a way that's not necessarily optimal. Maybe you don't need to put nails in that particular joint. Maybe you need an adhesive. Maybe you need
mhm.
screws. Maybe you need bolts. Maybe you shouldn't be putting those two pieces together at all.
Right.
Taking that approach to chase after the shiny thing is a distraction from what could actually be the gains of a lot of these analytical methods.
Mhm,
CNBC, I think it was last week, maybe the week before, actually recently did an article. This is not something that is exclusive to the public sector. This is happening in the private sector around,
mhm,
even within the big tech giants.
mhm,
If you go and you read the article, it goes through a lot of anonymous AI engineers, which are telling the story of these executives that are getting pressure to include AI in everything. And so
mhm,
what they're doing is they're pushing out features, they're pushing out these tools that may or may not be useful and that are not necessarily based off of an individual user's need. They don't
mhm,
necessarily push that outcome forward. But because everybody needs to take advantage of AI and because there is now a certain amount of cachet or value that is given to leaders who have been able to do AI,
mhm,
they're not taking advantage or motivating those leaders to say, hey, have you used AI to do a thing? And what was that thing? And what was that low effort thing?
mhm,
I can give you, I'll give you a great example. Where and I'm not going to name any names just because I don't want to throw any particular agency under the bus.
mhm,
Was taken into a government agency during my career at Accenture, and I was
mhm.
working with the CIO of this government agency, and they had a problem. I'm not going to tell you the problem because that'll probably give the agency away.
Yeah.
This CIO was absolutely convinced that we needed to use deep learning because at the time it was around the 2019 timeframe. Deep learning was all the rage, neural networks, and they absolutely thought we need to use deep learning to solve this problem. The
Mhm,
problem itself ended up getting solved by creating a join on three Oracle tables and running a sum function. Very, very basic, very, very quick, but we still got the business value that they needed. We just did it
mhm,
in so much of a smart way. All
mhm,
of which is a big, long ramble to say, I'm not saying the public sector don't use generative AI. I'm not saying that there aren't amazing things that can be done with generative AI. What I'm
mhm,
saying is that as of right now, the entire focus on generative AI is distracting from the low-hanging fruit that could be gained with other analytical methodologies. The public sector is still very, very new to the data maturity curve. Let me say it. CDOs are still getting their feet under them. They've made a lot of good gains in the past 5 years, but they have a lot more they can do. My biggest fear is, especially as if you go look at Gartner, Gartner puts chat GP, large language models right at the tip of the hype cycle. We're going to hit that trough of disillusionment. And the potential negative here is if everybody gets disillusioned by AI, they're also going to get disillusioned on all of those other analytical methods, which could be embedded into a process to drive those forward.
Yeah, 100%. No, and I completely agree with you, and I think that the public sector is, I was talking to a contracting officer a couple days ago who does a lot of work, and I won't say specifically which agency, but they do a lot of work in and around where the government and the public intersect, right? And because of I mean, it's something that happened during COVID because of during COVID, there were a lot more complaints being routed to this specific agency around something, and their solution was they had like 150 FAQ on their website, and they wanted people to go through and read it and figure out how to go about going to the right place, right? And instead of creating like a yes no questions, like 4 or 5 yes no questions where it'd go and prompt you, hey, do you need to, there's some qualifying questions in and around specifically to help understand and help the public route who they should be reaching out to in the government to lodge this complaint as opposed to going to this one specific agency. Somebody internally decided to build a chat bot, right? That ended up, and like I'm sure you do the same things that whenever like I hate chatbots, right? Second,
I think
anytime.
most people hate chatbots.
Right. It's like I think the chatbots, frankly, are just like 800 numbers where I'm just trying to get to operator, right? I want a person because I know that I can explain a complex problem to a person, right? And really, at the end of the day, somebody internally at this agency got a new toy to play with. I don't think the problem was ever solved, and they spent a lot of money to end up essentially at the same net result. When in reality, you ask 5 or 6 qualifying questions, you do a lot better overall, and then you solve the problem in a very inexpensive way. And I think that you're 100% right when you start looking at this. Is that AI? Like people are losing the idea of keeping things simple and keeping it simple overall, and just taking simple approaches to solve a problem as opposed to, just because it's Gen AI. I mean, I know you see this too, where every single email app now has write this with AI, rewrite this with AI. Every messaging app, rewrite this with AI. It's on LinkedIn. I assume it's on Facebook. I assume it's everywhere. And I like, and it's there just because it's there, not because it's necessarily solving any problems. And I mean, it is just wild.
And it's funny that you say chatbot because that is the number one use case that I have seen people
Mhm,
talk about with LLMs. And
mhm,
nobody likes them. Nobody gets any. You could have the most useful chatbot in the world. The fact of the matter is that most users, and this is what I mean by getting to the heart of that decision, that heart of
mhm.
like people are going to do, even if it is a good chatbot, let's suspend disbelief. Even
Right.
if it's a good chatbot that you can give the most complex questions to in the same way that you would get a human, and you would get a better and faster answer than
Mhm,
most people, the majority of people that I know of, do the same thing that you do. They just get on that chatbot and they don't even give it a chance. They say agent, agent, agent.
mhm,
They mash the zero button and say, let me speak to a representative because they
mhm.
want to get to that person. And a
Yep.
lot of that has to do with the fact that we're people and we like communicating with other people. We don't like communicating with machines. That's
Right.
one of the fundamental things that just comes with being human.
Mhm,
That doesn't mean you can't use LLMs or chatbots in order to be able to enable an agent to give better customer satisfaction, to be able to
mhm,
give quicker and more accurate ideas, to be able to solve those problems easier. But you shouldn't be taking this idea and doing something that, to my mind, is already pretty well known that the industry doesn't like. I remember seeing a statistic. I'm not going to say it because, as a data scientist, I should remember specific
yeah,
statistics, but it was in the 80% or something of people that just do not like chatbots and refuse to engage with them.
mhm. Yeah, no, 100, and yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from. I don't think I've ever used one truly, and I don't ever plan on it, right? I hate how difficult it is to get, you call an 800 number. I hate how difficult it is to get somebody on the phone, and it's not like I've ever enjoyed the experience of talking to somebody in a customer service center ever, right? But it doesn't mean that it's not gonna be less painful than talking to a machine.
Well, and why do you even need to talk to them at all? I mean, so let's come up with a human, like let's live stream like a human in the loop interaction. So if
Mhm,
I was the one that was doing this, and I pitched this a couple times, and instead of doing a chatbot, I mean, what do most so there's a lot of people that need to have access to voice. I completely understand that. But there is an upcoming generation that is all about the texting.
Mhm.
People don't even know that phones actually make phone calls anymore.
That's true.
But if you could send in text message questions, and a lot of apps are already doing this. I can hop on my Hyatt app right now and I can text the hotel and they're going to respond with an answer. If I could text a government agency, I can get the best of both worlds because I could have an actual human on the other end of that, and I can have that human be augmented by generative AI.
Mhm.
So I'm not saying that the generative AI is going to answer those text-based questions. I'm saying that
Right.
the generative AI can give that agent specific accelerated things, which based off that human knowledge, they can modify, they can change, and they can
Mhm.
get those answers done a lot quickly. You still get a lot of good savings. You
Right.
still get the customers the access of what they need, and you still get that human in the loop.
Mhm. Yeah. No, 100%. So, obviously, there are clearly some use cases for AI, but for Gen AI specifically, but, regardless, what do you think that we should be investing in outside of it? And what do you think will potentially be stifled when this Gen AI bubble starts popping?
So, in terms of investment, like I said, I already talked a lot about that blueprint architecture. I think that is the primary place that public sector just isn't very good at doing.
Mhm.
And I don't blame them for being doing. Let me give you a great example. I'll throw myself and my own agency under the bus, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They are tasked with monitoring wholesale power transactions in the US to make sure that nobody has market power. My position specifically is the market-based rate one. How do you actually quantify an individual rulemaking's impact on a market that's complex? It's hard. It's really
Right.
hard. It's almost impossible. The outcomes tracking on that is very, very hard. So if we say, hey, is this rule good or bad for the market? We don't, there's not a lot of objective quantitative thing. Same thing with the Marshalls example that we're talking. There's not really a good quantitative way to do it.
Mhm.
The
Well, also,
problem is
how do
that
you define good and bad in those situations too, right?
how
And
do you define good
what
and bad?
and what is
Exactly.
what are what's better for the market, right? I mean, before you even get to those, like, how do you even define good and bad, and how do you like good for whom, bad for whom? Because if it's good, I think that's also I think that's a lot of the time lost as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of the time lost, but all agencies have mission, and the public sector is just filled with. I mean, one of the reasons I stay in the public sector is it's filled with people who care deeply about that mission.
Mhm.
But trying to start the conversation on those outcomes and how those outcomes are being tracked, even if you're wrong, even if you're wrong, starting to track outcomes and seeing how that would be, I think, would be the best place to start building up that architecture. And
Mhm.
what I think that enables, you asked me what I think should be invested in the most,
Mhm.
is, as I said previously, one of the biggest issues that I see in the analytical realm is everybody's making it a tool. They're making it a tool. But if you look at some of the best algorithms out there, the people that are doing the best with analytics. Everybody knows this. The Netflix recommendation engine, the Instagram model of showing you ads, like all of these things that are out there, getting you to click on different things that are optimized for it. Do you know how they do that?
Mhm.
They take that, it's not the best and greatest algorithm in the world. They're
Right.
taking that science-based segmentation approach to learning. What if you took that same idea of utilizing the data science and analytics, not just as a way to deliver outcomes and value, but as a way to start learning more about that mission and about that particular thing that you're trying to accomplish, that outcome that you're going for. Imagine if you take that and you apply that to benefit payments and
Mhm.
you start learning how people are going to be approaching those benefit payments better. Maybe you need someone that's going to text in to get the benefit payments.
Mhm.
Maybe you need somebody who needs to go the snail mail route or fax machines if those are still a thing.
Right.
Maybe you could start targeting those government services to provide better services based off of that individual's profile or that individual's need and
Mhm.
learn throughout the time. That is where I think the investment should be going because that is where I think the government is going to start getting some of their greatest bets. And you can see pockets of this. I'm not going to call any specific out,
Mhm.
but you can see some pockets of where this is actually starting to take place, where they're looking at that outcome, they're building tools to get that outcome, they're seeing how they did that outcome, they're
Mhm.
learning from that, and then they're starting to do it just a little bit different and a little bit more customized
Mhm.
for each one. There is a great potential. So I know I was just maybe throwing a little bit of shade at large language models, but there's a
Mhm.
little bit of potential for large language models. One of the use cases that I find the most compelling is um, the customized teaching ones. So there is this entire idea that you can take a chat GPT and you can use it to come up with customized language content based off of how an individual is learning. Why can't we do the same thing for delivering government services? Why can we not do the same thing to take those really hard, complex problems and
Mhm,
start learning a little bit more about them. Start learning what is good and what is bad, or
mhm,
what is wanted or what is unwanted, and how
mhm.
individual actions are driving those towards where it is.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I think that goes to meeting people where they are, right? It doesn't matter. And to your point earlier about it doesn't matter it doesn't matter how good you are at communicating. If you're not presenting the information in the right way to the right person, you will not be heard. It doesn't matter how good your message is, right? It just doesn't matter because what you say is as important as how you say it. And a lot of the time, what you say is just, if you're saying it wrong, is just completely overpowered by it.
I would, yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I would even add to that. You're bringing up the what you say, the what you do. There needs
Mhm,
to be more comfort level with failure when you're dealing with analytics. And by that, I don't mean that you're actually taking government service. No government service should be taken and thrown entirely into ChatGPT's hands, because then chaos will ensue. What
mhm,
I mean is that, again, the science part of data science, the hypothesis driven testing,
mhm,
get comfortable with the fact you are going to try to do a thing, you're going to test it out in a controlled way that is going to have minimal impact on citizens. And if it fails, you're going to learn from it.
mhm.
Government
Yeah.
agencies are terrified of failing. And I don't blame them. I would be terrified of failing, especially if I'm doing one of the more nuanced things. But that doesn't mean I can't come up with a
Mhm.
controlled experimental environment to try it out,
Yeah.
insert it into a process a little bit by a little bit, and to see if it's working, and to
Mhm.
take learnings of whether or not it works to make myself a little bit better the next time I try to do it.
Yep.
So I'm not just rushing to build up this software thing or to embed natural language processing into this particular tool of choice. I
Mhm.
am learning about it, and I'm failing a little bit as I do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you. I think that, I mean, a great example, and this is not, software or AI or anything related, but you look at, NASA versus SpaceX. NASA, there's no way they could have lost rockets at the same rate that
Mm-hmm.
SpaceX did in the beginning. And that, that lack of risk tolerance, led to private sector being the leader there as opposed to government continuing to lead. And what SpaceX is really, really good at is taking NASA research and just repurposing it into the private sector because they have the risk tolerance for things going boom, whereas NASA does not.
No, and that's absolutely a great point, and I think that is perfect. I
Mhm,
would say I would rather have the risks done smallly, and maybe even in those controlled
mhm,
versions. Because I mean,
mhm,
who wants to start taking risks with Social Security or Medicaid or Medicare? Those are big risks to be taking. Uh,
mhm, mhm.
that doesn't mean you can't do it. That just means you need to start figuring out ways in which those risks can be controlled in order to learn more.
I completely agree, and so, I mean, what do you think some of the implications of not making these investments in control ways are going to be over the long term?
So, I mean, everywhere is afraid of falling behind. I mean, I go to a lot of defense conferences, and a lot of them are worried about losing the decisional edge, particularly because a lot of our competitors, again, I'm not going to say any other countries, but a lot of our competitors in the DoD space, they have a little bit less of a risk tolerance, or more of a risk tolerance than we do.
Mhm,
They're willing to take something that's not quite working perfectly and throw it in there. Whereas we like to do things ethically, we like to do things well, we like to build them in.
mhm,
Where we are risking is we are going to fall behind. If we get too distracted by the big shiny toy, which is LLMs right now, and it's going to be another one next year of like, oh, we need to do this, we need to do this. We're missing those small gains that can be made on a day-to-day basis utilizing less big methods.
mhm,
Every single job in the world, and I don't care what it is, unless like I can't even think of a single example, even if you're one of the big tech companies, has some gains that could be made in the decisional advantage by building little small tools into those individual processes. If we're
mhm,
going for the big bangs, we're missing all of those. And
mhm,
those little individual gains matter over time, and that is where we're going to go. And as people keep throwing the money and keep throwing the investment and keep chasing the big dream without getting those individual baselines done first, we're going to
mhm,
be something. The other thing is, as much as we're chasing off the big after the big tools, the data in a lot of places, especially in the public sector, is just not there yet. And
mhm.
the way the data needs to look for LLMs is going to be completely different for the way that the data is going to have to look for other more traditional machine learning models.
Mhm, mhm. What do you can you clarify that for people that are not technical, and make that a little bit more accessible to somebody that has no knowledge on what that means?
Sure. So LLMs do very, very well with huge amounts of unstructured data that is not labeled whatsoever. If I
Mhm,
want to build a machine learning model, I generally will need some structured data and I will need some label of outcome of what it is I'm trying to do. And
mhm,
machine learning, even LLMs, is pattern detection. That's all
mhm,
it is. It is detection of patterns. What you're doing with labeled data sets or supervised learning is you're teaching it to tell the difference between a pattern that was labeled this way and a pattern that was labeled this way. And based off of how well those patterns are, is how good its predictions are.
mhm.
LLMs operate a little bit different, where you give that a whole bunch of things and without the labels, and it goes through and it detects the patterns all by itself in
Mhm,
order to regurgitate what it knows.
mhm. Okay, okay. And then I would assume that, the ways you think might fall behind there is, like, we just won't have as much structured data, so we won't be able to do the other things that we need to do with it as we move forward. Because I mean, I don't know, and I don't know if LLMs have the capacity to tag data for us, or how accurate that would be.
There's
Um,
some research actually that they're pretty good at that in terms of actually starting to be able to do the tagging. But again, it's you can't build everything with a nail gun.
yeah, correct.
Eventually, you're going to need something else, and eventually, those something else's are going to give you a better push and a bigger bang for your buck. LLMs are still very new.
Mhm.
Their impact is still very much not known. Versus, I mean, I've worked with the public sector that is still having problems doing enterprise search.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily something you just want to throw an LLM at. It could work, especially if you're dealing with something like a RAG model or something that is going to constrain a lot of the hallucinations. But even like knowledge management and basic enterprise search is something that you're going to need more than just a traditional LLM approach to be able to do.
Yeah, no, 100%. I appreciate the additional clarification there. So I mean, how do you think some of the best ways we can unlock value in the public sector? What do you think some of the ways we could do that are, and what do you think is needed from an investment perspective and from a psyche perspective to get us there?
So again, I think when I think what's going to unlock that value, I think it's really spending the time to think through that decisional architecture.
Hmm.
Who's making what decisions? Why are they making those decisions? What information are they basing those decisions on? And how do we think we can make those decisions better? That's what it is at the end of the day. That's all data science. That's all analytical is it's building those tools that make those knowledge questions a little bit easier.
Hmm.
How do we need to be able to do that? There's sometimes a lot of fear in the government for doing that much planning. And there's sometimes too much planning to be able to do it. You need to be able to sit there. You need to get very, very tailored. You need to spend some time planning. I've always found the sweet spot to be somewhere between like 6 months or 6 weeks to 3 months. Uh, do a little bit of planning, try it out, revisit the plan. Try
Hmm.
it out, revisit the plan. That's where I think that a lot of the bangs for the gut buck would go.
Absolutely.
I think uh, to add on to that, the planning should be less about these big documents that come out that be like, this is our strategic plan for however many years, and we're going to use yada yada, and
Hmm.
more about that actionable, tactical way to do it. Human-centered design has been for a while. Government loves human-centered design. There's very
Hmm.
few proposals I see, RFPs come out, I see that don't include some type of human-centered design component.
Hmm.
Use that. Get people in the room. Get the individuals, the GS9s through 13s who are making these decisions, who are doing a lot of the work. Get them in the room. Ask them where their pain points are. Have them start elucidating. I'm not saying that word right. Where where they think the value can come for giving them new tools.
Hmm.
Starting to do that level of engagement at that micro level is going to number one, help you to do that planning in a way that is going to then be testable and then be implementable. And number two is going to start driving a lot of that organizational alignment. It is very, very rare for me to walk into an organization, especially a federal one, where there is not a disconnect between the
Hmm.
IT department and the business or department on the outcome. It,
Hmm.
it I I would be shocked if I ever walked in and I just did not see some type of disconnect on it. I
Hmm.
get a lot of the reasons for that, but starting to make that a collaborative conversation, SEC did a great job about that. I will say, I will throw a lot of props. When I was at the SEC under their CDO and CIO office, I think they did an amazing job engaging the business from the very, very beginning. And I think that's why they got a lot of the value that I saw from that project.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and I've heard countless stories of end users from the Fed. People end users either as civilians and just working as GS9s through 13s, whatever, and also military personnel who would have this new amazing toy rolled out to them and would have to figure out how to make it work for the mission as opposed to having a tool that was designed to solve the problems that they were actually having in the field. And when you have to when you're people in the field, and I mean this goes back to losing edges with our competitors, and when you don't have the right tool for the job, you're never going to really be able to do a good enough job. Back to like the nail gun analogy, right?
And I mean, it seems very, very simple, especially as we're talking about this new and advanced technology. But you're right. Like, go talk to the people who are going to use the tool, ask them what they need, and then like make it a conversation where you're saying, "Oh, is this what you meant? Is this what you meant? Is this what you meant?" Same thing with analytics.
Right, absolutely. Whenever I recruit, it's the exact same thing. It's my biggest thing whenever I recruit, how I set expectations with clients is I'm like, listen, I will sit, I will help. I want to understand what you're actually looking for. Then I'm going to give you a couple of people and I want you to look at it and say yes, no, and why. And the why is the most important part because then I can go refine the search and do a better job for you and help again through a A/B testing process, help really understand what it is you're actually looking for internally to solve the problem that you have because you're talking to me because you have a problem, right? And that's it. And I it's not rocket science, but it's not simple by any stretch of the imagination. And I think also when you're dealing at the scale that the federal government is dealing at with, anything at that scale, it's just going to come with its own challenges, right?
Absolutely.
100%, man. So, and then obviously, as we have been talking public sector, I mean, from a regulatory framework perspective, how do you think some of these things should be set up? Do you think that there's, how can we go about setting it up properly to ensure that it, both enhances innovation, but at the same time, or, empowers innovation, but at the same time doesn't allow for things like bias, misuse, and other more, let's just say, not even nefarious, but accidental downsides.
Standardized guardrails. So again, I know this seems like a very easy answer to a very negligible question, but uh, I live in fear of something like FedRAMP for AI. Don't get me wrong, FedRAMP is meant to do a specific thing. I get worried that it's going to be applied more broadly to a tool set like this. What
Mhm,
I would like to see is I would like to see a set of standards for what do we mean by ethical? What do we mean by bias?
mhm,
Bias it gets a bad rap. Sometimes you need to be a little bit biased in the way that these things are done. What I mean by that is when we're talking about segmentation, sometimes you need to be able to provide services differently to people based off of the fact that they're colorblind or that they have a different need. That is a bias in a model. That if I have to give this services to this one because they are this way, I need to be able to do it a little bit differently or a little bit or a little bit better. In terms of we can go back to the Marshalls example. There is a bias in that they are only going after fugitives.
mhm.
That
Right.
is that is something that is there. Modeling that bias is very, very important because there's a lot of things that can creep in under the guise of, well, that's just what it is. Sexism, racisms, we can go through all the isms that are applicable to it. Monitoring that bias, figuring out how to ask the right questions before developing the model, while the model is running, and how you're monitoring that model are the important piece. And what I would like to see is some type of standardized framework that the government comes out in order to be able to do it. That is a very, very hard problem, and it's going to take a lot of different conversations because the bias that you're going to see if you are a law enforcement agency is going to be very, very different than the bias that you're going to see if you're a DoD agency, if you're a Fed Civ agency, if you're a health agency.
Right.
A lot of them are going to have the same, but a lot of them are also going to have similarities. It is
Mhm,
more of a framework for how do you ask the questions? How do you document this? How do you make it transparent for the stakeholders that are there so that it can continue the conversation on those individual levels?
mhm.
So, have a framework. This is how we're going to have this conversation. It'll be our initial things. This is how we're going to make it viewed by everyone. And then, as people are actually looking at those outcomes, we can have that evolving questions. Nobody's going to be able to sit down right now and be like, in this specific use case, the exact amount of bias that's going to be applicable is A, B, and C, and we're going to do it this way. Not
Mhm.
going to
Absolutely. And I think one of the most promising areas for AI, and its use case is going to be, I think we've touched on it a couple of times, is tailoring services to specific people, right? Whether
happen.
it's you whether it's you call it 800 number and it knows who you are, it knows your phone number, it knows how you interact with people, and it will meet you where you are, right? And I think that, while I understand the need to ensure that we don't have a lot of biases or certain kinds of biases, we also need to figure out how to communicate right with people, communicate with people in the most effective way and how to meet them where they are. And also, I mean, like, from a health agency perspective, different people that grew up in different areas with different backgrounds, with different that have, that are, whatever, different races, different sexes, they all have different kinds of issues, and those issues become more are present in, in different groups of folks at different rates. And we need to understand how to best, counteract, and how to best counteract that is a lot of communicating a lot of these things. And being able to have that level of personalization built into a system is inherently really cool and could be very exciting and could really do a lot to enhance the delivery of services to folks. But you're 100% right that if you try to force a one size fits all on a lot of these things, you're going to lose a lot of that innovation, and you're just not going to be able to deliver that. But also there can't like you can't do things like that in other areas and in other environments where it could be more harmful and cause more harm than good, right? And I
Yeah,
think it's a very fine line to walk.
yeah, no, and it, someone could argue that that one size fits all solution is even more biased than any of the other solutions.
How so?
Huh? Well,
How
because
so?
it's biased towards the majority, biased towards who somebody thinks the majority wants, biased towards. So I was at an industry day recently, and they were talking about their. I'm not going to name any
Mhm,
things, but they did this publicly. They made the announcement and talked about how they learned from it. But basically, they were putting out these grant funding opportunities, and they were throwing a lot of things in there that they thought people needed. They thought they needed. That's a bias in and of itself. I am
mhm,
biased because I am taking me as a grant funding officer's opinion on what it is they need. They actually sat down with people and they realized they don't need half of it. They don't need most of it. And it just burdens them because the big grant funding thing was a lot to read. And so they took it out. And they've been doing a great job of engaging with the users to start trimming down and figuring out what do they actually need. That
mhm,
in and of itself, that one size fits all mentality, that idea that I can just go to structure this without actually talking to people who are going to do it,
mhm.
that in and of itself is an injection of a specific type of bias.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I remember a conversation I had years ago. I just jogged it in my memory of a gentleman who ran a nonprofit organization, and he grew up on an island in the South Pacific somewhere. And this is in like the 70s or 80s, and there was a tsunami or earthquake hit it. I forget which one. And it's and the relief planes came in, and the first round of planes that came in brought cases and cases and cases of like bottled water and blankets, but it was like 80 degrees there, and they didn't need blankets, and it's like that it coulda had food or anything else there, and you need to understand, again, who are you speaking to, and how can you actually what is the problem that actually needs to be solved, and how can you approach people and try to actually solve that?
Mhm.
Absolutely, man. And
I think what we've arrived at is the summation of the point here of
mhm,
uh, don't just get the magic thing, solve the actual problems and utilize analytics as the tool in which you can help accelerate that.
amazing. Never would have gotten there otherwise. Anything else you wanna say on closing, my friend?
No, I appreciated the time here. I've enjoyed the conversation.
As have I, man. Thank you so much, really appreciate it. Looking forward to chatting with you again soon.
Talk to you later.